in Q4 of last year, we saw over 4,000 events come through on agents that we had deployed where we actually stopped the potential ransomware from actually deploying, right?
Assemble the council.
Ransomware is the number one threat to modern businesses. An attack that happens in mere moments can result in lost revenue, weeks of downtime, millions of dollars in incident response costs, damages from lawsuits or regulatory fines, loss of consumer trust, and it can even impact the stock price. Everything that I've just said comes from the Halcyon website. Our special guest today is Ben Carr, and he is going to teach us about ransomware and more. Ben Carr is a 4-time CISO. He's been a CISO for Cradlepoint, Qualys, Aristocrat, and now he is with Halcyon AI. That is a cybersecurity company that is confronting ransomware directly. During his 4-time CISO career, Ben has also held the title of Chief Trust Officer twice. That title deserves an individual call-out. It's a very unique role. It implies that a company is leaning on you to help build assurance and relationships with stakeholders. This is a dimension of the office of the CISO that every CISO should be striving for, and Ben is right there, setting a beachhead and a benchmark. But wait, there's more. Ben has also built formidable security teams at Tenable, Visa, and Nokia. Full disclosure, I had the opportunity to work in Ben's orbit at Visa back in 2015, 2016. And Ben's career example is one of the reasons that I pursued becoming a CISO myself. Ben's going to tell us about Halcyon and ransomware today. Of course, here at the Cybersecurity Council, we serve cyber leaders. So I will also ask Ben as many questions as I can get away with to see if we can stoke some general advice on being a good steward of the office of the CISO. There's one more thing. November 8th, 2024, the Cybersecurity Council will be hosting its first ever annual conference at Q2 Stadium. Yes, you heard that right. The Cybersecurity Council is becoming such a thriving organization that we're booking venues at stadiums now. We need big places for big ideas. Ben Carr and his company Halcyon AI will be one of our sponsors for that event. Our conversation today is an early introduction and exploration of topics you may hear on November 8th. We welcome Halcyon AI to the table. Ben, say hello to our audience. How are you today? How is Halcyon? And is there anything in my introduction of you that you think needs a tweak?
No, man, that was a great introduction. I mean, thanks for such a deep and well thought out introduction and discussion of kind of my past and history of what I'm doing. It's great to be here with you on the podcast and talking all things Cybersecurity Council. Really great to be here representing Halcyon. Like you said, I've been in the seat for quite a while now. Had a bunch of very different roles, different industries. Bringing a lot of information to bear, and hopefully, we can help out people who are experiencing the threat of ransomware. Which, look, when I was in the seat, and still when I talk to colleagues and peers today, cyber is typically certainly in the top 3, but usually the top cyber risks for the business. And then if you drill down into that from a cyber perspective, it's usually ransomware, right? Like we're still getting hit, we're still seeing breaches, we're still seeing problems out there in the environment. A couple of weeks ago, Fortune 50 organization, $75 million payment, highest reported to date. I've heard rumors that there actually were some larger payments, but that's the highest kind of publicly reported information. But we still see this. We saw Change Healthcare, we saw CDK Global this year. It's a repetitive thing, and people keep wondering, why is ransomware still a problem? And that's why Halcyon's here, and we're here to help. But yeah, really, really great to have a conversation, and let's see where we go.
I think June was the worst month for ransomware yet. So it's definitely a problem that is not going away. So your insights are going to be valuable. Ben, I'd like to start by asking you about last Friday. Last week, the Cybersecurity Council hosted a cyber luncheon right here in Austin, Texas, where our special guests were Tim Brown, the CISO of SolarWinds, and Joe Sullivan, a former CISO of Facebook and Uber. For me, it was incredible to hear those two CISOs together. They have had direct experience with both breaches and, yes, they have had legal entanglements with the US government. That's me saying that lightly. I could argue that those two CISOs have more lived experience, perhaps, than the next 100 CISOs on the list combined. Um, at the end of their panel discussion, I realized how much of a privilege it was to have been in that room. And I said something in the room to the effect of, I've been in 75 or so rooms full of CISOs where we're working on the topics of the day. And this may have been the most insightful conversation that I've been a part of yet. So it was absolutely amazing to hear directly from Tim Brown and Joe Sullivan. Now, Ben, you were in that room too. Now, while staying true to the Chatham House rules, right, where what was said in that room stays in that room, how did you feel during that conversation?
Scott, I actually wanted to attend, but I couldn't. I got stuck traveling. So I've been like traveling extensively right now, doing these things, right? Podcasts, getting to conferences, talking to my peers and colleagues out there in the industry. So last week, had it on my calendar, was trying to get out there, but actually coming back from California, so couldn't attend. But I know Joe. I know Tim, right? I've been in the room with them before. I've been in the room, in kind of a closer knit organization than even that Chatham House rules conversation. And uh, look, it's a concern that every CISO or every person aspiring to the role needs to really take a look at and say, look, it's not just a title. There's a lot of responsibility that comes with it. A lot of challenges that come with it. I think a lot of people get to that point and realize, oh, it's not for me, right? I mean, corollary is in the sales side. If you're out there carrying a bag, I know a lot of people have moved into sales leadership and said, man, there's a lot more here than I thought. I just really want to go back and carry a bag and do my number and not have to worry about it, right? I don't want all the HR issues. I don't want all the trying to manage everybody else, trying to figure out how to do the logistics around making sure the number comes in. Well, it's the same thing on the CISO side. And that's a lot of what I've talked to Joe and I've talked to Tim about is when you're looking at that role now, there's a different set of things you have to take into consideration. And it's, do I have D&O insurance, right? When you talk to somebody about when you're taking the role, do they really understand even the complexities of D&O insurance? Because there's not many people who are actually covered by D&O, right? And so that conversation up until about a year ago was really hard to have. And I think it's still challenging to have. But then there's also the question of, what's your personal liability look like, right? Like, how are you going to handle that? Do you have counsel on retainer? Are you actually having counsel review your offer letter to make sure that everything's included? Do you have a parachute attached, right? So if something happens and you're the guy that ends up having to take the fall for it, that you're covered on the backside of it, right? There's just a lot of conversation there that needs to be have around the role, and it's a lot more. I think now people are trying to figure it out. And as a result, I think we're seeing some CISOs exit, right? Some CISOs deciding, hey, I want to go either the vendor side, I want to just do, advisement work. I've heard people trying to go to the vCISO route, right? I've heard a lot of people trying to go the vCISO route who've never actually been CISOs, which I always find very interesting. But yeah, I mean, look, we could have an hour and a half, 2 hour conversation just on that conversation topic. But yeah, happy to dig down further.
I appreciate the fullness and completeness of your answer, my friend. Ben, what inspired you to join Halcyon AI?
So I've known John and Ryan, the founders of Halcyon for quite a while. I actually worked with them. When I was over at Visa. John did some work for us when he was over at Optiv Acumen back in the day, and I've known the guys. I've known what he's done. I actually work with the Sin Investment Group, who a VC firm who invested in Halcyon very early on, kind of Series A round. And I was really impressed with what they were doing in the space. I was impressed with the fact that, they were taking on a very, very narrow focus, right? Ransomware. They weren't trying to do a bunch of different things. It was, hey, let's address this ransomware problem and let's hit it head on, and the holisticness of the solution. So, they first try to prevent. If they can't prevent, which hasn't happened yet, 100% efficacy. So that's a great statistic when you're looking at onboarding with a company that the product actually works, right? Um, but if somehow somebody gets beyond the Halcyon agent, then we can capture key material, right? And then we just announced the fact that we can actually, we had called DXP, data exfiltration prevention,
Ah,
prevent the exfiltration of data out. So when you think about how a ransomware attack happens and how the threat actor tries to get in, sometimes today they're not even trying to encrypt. They're just trying to get that data out, and it's merely an extortion play, right? And it can be double, triple, quadruple extortion on down the line. So anyone's data who they've achieved access to, they can attack it. So when I looked at completeness of vision, when I looked at where the company was, the people that were on board, and the problem set, right, being interesting to me as a CISO sitting in the seat, yeah, it was a no-brainer. I mean, Halcyon just was a really good fit.
being able to find a home and having that be the right home, that's great. I imagine you're already making a difference for Halcyon. Is there an overall vision or mission that you'd like to expand on?
I guess the good and the bad of it is it's singular, right? It's ransomware. It's we're just trying to get in the way and prevent companies from having to deal with the threat and the payment of a ransomware exposure, right? So a lot of people come into the solution and they ask, like, can I replace my endpoint protection? And that's not what we're here to do, right? We're not here to replace. We're here to say, look, endpoint protection is still valid. You need it. It's something that everybody should have, but people are getting by the endpoint protection with ransomware. So we've seen thousands of instances where we have agents deployed where a threat actor will still be able to bypass that endpoint agent no matter what it is, right? We all know, the big three that are out there, still bypass it, right? Not for malicious activity, for malware. I mean, they still do a good job at that, but from a ransomware attack vector, it gets bypassed. And so, they also try to shut off those agents. And so what we do is we up armor those agents, prevent them from being turned off. But then we also, again, prevention's the first thing, getting key capture, and then preventing that exfiltration of data. It's funny to me. I mean, most CISOs, most people out there, I think, they really like the fact that we do the key capture. It's kind of the sexy, right? I think in security, we always try to pivot, or people tend to pivot towards the sexy stuff, right? I call it chasing the silver ball. You got a cat and you wave the silver ball in front of them and they go after it and they bat it and they forget what they were doing, right? They forget the hygiene, they forget all the other things that they were focusing on. And for me, prevention is the biggest thing, right? If I can prevent, I don't have the incident. But it really seems interesting to a lot of people, this ability of us to capture key material or capture the keys. And if you actually did have a ransomware event that actually was successful, we can push those keys right down to the agent and have you back up and running in hours instead of, days, weeks, months sometimes, right? I mean, it's very impactful when somebody gets hit by ransomware. So I just really love the mission.
That's a great mission. In my head, I was listening to what you were saying and I was trying to tabulate up all of the features. Up armoring the endpoint agents, doing the data exfiltration prevention, and I lost track of all the pieces that you said. So even though you started with, Scott, no, we're hyper focused on ransomware, you're actually doing a lot. So that's very cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think you say anti-ransomware, people think like, yeah, just a little piece, right? But it is, there's a secret sauce there. It's difficult to do. That's why it hasn't been done well. And then, it's a holistic solution again. Like I can't harp enough on the fact that it's not just, prevention. And if you get bias, well, we hope to have a updated prevention in the future. No, it's we prevent 100% efficacy, but then also key capture and exfiltration prevention, right? So even if we didn't prevent, like you're kind of protected there, right? It's the nature of the beast that we have to be very vigilant on this and look at it as a holistic problem, not just one trick pony.
Well, Halcyon is riding the AI wave. Would you like to tell us about that?
AI is interesting to talk about. I hear a lot of people, a lot of security companies touting how they're have some basis or attachment to AI. And again, I go back to the shiny ball syndrome. Like AI is the shiny ball of now, right? Certainly, if you go to a concert, if you were at RSA, if you were a Black Hat, everybody's talking about AI, right? Because everybody, I think, wants to get on that wave. But it's key to what we do. I mean, actually looking at the activity and what happens in a ransomware attack on the endpoint, actually evaluating and understanding that, yes, this is actually ransomware. It's not normal activity. which is, again, one of the differentiators between us and, your normal endpoint protection platforms is they're looking for defined bad behavior that those AI platforms have been trained on, and their ML has been trained on this defined bad activity of malware. Where what we're doing is we're saying this is normally good activity, right? And so it's a much more complicated process to look at and said, it's a copy, it's a move, it's an encryption event. Like those are all normal things that happen on the system all the time. And so evaluating that, really understanding it with an AI model that's been trained to identify ransomware activity, and it's establishing essentially a confidence score that gets ratcheted up or down depending upon what's happening on the system, and then saying, okay, we know for sure this is ransomware. Let's actually stop it. So the challenge there is, as everybody's doing these normal things in the environment, having a model, an AI model that can actually look at it and say, I can identify the good from the bad, and I'm not going to cause impact in the normal course of business. So, we're not going to have incidents where people are doing work and they're getting stopped or prevented from doing their normal things. Yet, we're going to immediately lock down and stop once we detect and we see a ransomware event happening on the system. We're going to stop that and prevent that from happening. So it's challenging to be 100% effective, in everyday life when you're trying to prevent ransomware, but at the same time, allowing everyday life of the normal office operation to go on without impact, right? That's a very fine knife edge to balance.
Ben, I'm very, very glad that I chose to address Chief Trust Officer when I introduced you today. You have those specific skills, the the soft skills of being able to offer and articulate the cybersecurity value proposition at speed. You're talking to me, a cyber professional, but I can tell that everything that you are articulating is fit for purpose for talking to just about any type of stakeholder. Um, what I'd like to ask was the trust officer addition to your title, chief security and trust officer, did you come to Halcyon and say, I want this at the end of my name? Or was it, how did that happen?
Yeah, was it a push pull? Like where was the genesis? Yeah, so it's an interesting story. So when I was at Cradle Point, I had been there for about 3 or 4 months, and in that tenure, I had come in to take over a very nascent security program and kind of rebuild it, even though they had got acquired by Ericsson. Cradle Point was operating as an independent entity, and we needed to ensure that we were secure. 3 or 4 months in, they said, "Hey, you're doing a great job. We'd love for you to take over the CIO responsibilities too. And while you're there, why don't we kind of add in some privacy function to that because we've moved into, EMEA, and so as we're, moving into Europe and the rest of the world, we need to think about these privacy issues." And so, looking at the title when I thought about it, I was like, Chief Security Officer and CIO and Chief Private, like it just was unwieldy, right? And when I looked at it, I thought, what are we really trying to do here? We're trying to engender trust both internally within the organization. So, we have employees that can trust that they work for a company that's valuing their privacy and their information and the sensitivity of data they use with us, but also customers, right? We had a large customer platform and we wanted to make sure that we were engendering trust with customers. And so I wanted to keep security in there, right? Because I think that that's core to what we do. And I actually see a lot more of this motion where we're going to see chief security officers, chief information security officers taking over the role of kind of the CIO. And that's because, traditionally it's been the other way around, right? Security is reported up into IT. There's been this, I think, a big discussion for a number of years about that's a misplaced organizational alignment, right? But as we've seen the maturity and the move to cloud and transformation in IT, what the CIO does, it's kind of been split. Like there's functionally that back end that supports the organization, and then there's the rest of it that's almost like product or CTO type information, right? And there's a not as much of a large infrastructure on the inside, and so I think we're going to see security people start to take over those other roles. And again, I think it's not just unwieldy. It's what's the targeted mission that you're doing, right? And what I'm focused on is security and trust. So when I came over to Halcyon, had a discussion with John, had a discussion with several other people here, and what we talked about was like, what are we really trying to convey? And my discussion with them really centered around the fact that like what we should be doing first is putting people's focus on mind. That Halcyon's a company, a technology, a vision that they can trust to ensure their security. Hence, security and trust officer made a ton of sense to me and to the business.
Well, it's always helpful when your co-leaders of the company come to an agreement like that. Everybody sees the value. You are a very fortunate CISO indeed when that happens for you. Building your product, building your cybersecurity team. How are you managing the balance? Where are you investing?
Time is the most important commodity I think anybody has, right? Especially as you get more and more responsibility as you move up the chain. If you talk to John or Ryan, or you talk to any other founders, right, they'll tell you that time is in essence the big problem. And so I think it's looking at the balance of hiring the right people, putting the right team in place, where you can have people doing the right function and right role and right job, and making sure that you're not spending too much effort focusing on things that you're not offering the value to the company, right? And so I've seen a lot of organizations where that hasn't worked well, and you've got people who are leaders who don't trust the people that they hire, right? I'm a big believer, and you have to, again, it's a security principle, right? Trust but verify. Trust that the work's getting done. Trust that you're hiring those people to do the right thing. I think it's important to, as we move up the stack, as people move out of a more technical role generally to a more managerial or, C-level role, that you have to think about, okay, how do I get out of the stuff that I was doing? And I'm hiring people that can do that effectively. And I'm now focusing on the responsibilities and tasks that I need to be in the light of my new role. So that's the biggest thing for me. I mean, product security is certainly important. Securing the company is certainly important, but it's also the mission of talking to customers and engaging with people, and kind of explaining the mission of what we're doing and why it's important. I mean, I think, for any security leader, how do you get insight into the new technologies that are out there? You've got to have somebody who can actually articulate it and put the focus on the vision and the direction in a succinct way, where you're not watered down and it's not too technical and it's not too high level where you're missing the details. Again, kind of that fine line of balance.
As Halcyon has been growing, and this is always a difficult question for me because I feel like everybody is within bounds of having cybersecurity needs and things that
Sure.
they need to defend. But as Halcyon has been growing, have there been specific market niches that you've been targeting, specific business partners that you've been seeking here in the foundational era, if you will?
Yeah, good question. I think any company struggles when you're a startup to figure out, like, where do you go first, right? Because you certainly can't hit everybody. And so I think our focus has kind of been on the, mid-market enterprise side of the house, right? But we've had a lot of success on small to mid-market as well. It's not this technology isn't necessarily a consumer technology. It's not, something we're trying to push out from a retail or web portal kind of thing. It's not something where we're trying to hit really, really small businesses. I think that there's a big need on the ransomware side, but the challenge becomes, look, I think it's always a challenge of how a company scales. Even, you think about like a small security company or Halcyon type event, you've got 15 people, 20 people. Like, okay, who's your security guy? Well, I can't afford a security guy right now, right? So you try to do the best you can. You outsource some of that, but you kind of get to a sufficient size where you've got enough economy of scale where now you can say, okay, now I really need to think about security. The interesting thing is, if you build it in first, it's a lot cheaper and easier to do that, right? So if you do build it correctly from the get-go. So we're not necessarily focused on the very, very small, right? If you had, an office of 20 people, it's probably not something you're looking at. But certainly, if you've got a couple hundred people, if you're enterprise size, then yes, we're squarely in that market and looking to approach it. Large push through the channel, obviously channel focused organization, like many vendors are. But yeah, that's where we're trying to hit.
And right in your wheelhouse, how are you building trust with those organizations that are joining your family?
Yeah, so it's getting out and having conversations, right? Like getting that peer to peer, that CISO to CISO conversation, and letting them ask the hard questions, right? Like having transparency of like the way you build a program, what you're doing, what the internal security looks like, where your failures are. I mean, look, no company is 100%, right? Like there are things that we wish we could do with product that we're not there with yet. That will always be there. I mean, I think if you go talk to Palo Alto, they'll say that there's things that they wish they could do in the product that they can't do yet, right? So it's functionally figuring out how you're transparent enough with the customer to explain what you're doing, giving them that trust quotient, that factor that, look, even if these guys aren't, I need them to do X, but they can't do it yet. They've been transparent enough to tell me they're not doing it yet. They will get there, right? Or they have a goal in place, or we have a strategy together to get there. And I think it's about partnership. Like we're leaning heavily into, we're formalizing a customer advisory board, right? We're leaning into that relationship with the customers where we actually want to pull information like what they're looking for, how they want to deploy it, what they want to do with it, what are areas that we're missing that we could offer additional coverage or protection for. We just released Linux, right? So it's an increasing platform coverage to make sure that we're covering a much larger estate. So it's, again, I think the normal things that you think about in any relationship where you try to engender trust is what I'm out there trying to do.
Success stories? Anything out there disclosed?
Well, look, that's always the challenge, right? Is, we've got agreements with our customers where we necessarily can't say stuff, but you will see, like, we have a case study we're publishing right now on a customer that they actually were a customer of Halcyon. They bought a product from us. They had it implemented, but they didn't have it implemented fully across everything, right? So they had a gap where they had a couple systems that weren't, and they got compromised, right? Now, one of the interesting things is Halcyon was able to go back because I've talked about this. I've talked about this holistic solution that we offer. One thing I didn't mention is we have something we call our green light service, where we actually have a professional services team where they were able to actually go in. They were able to work with the customer, get a sample of the ransomware that actually happened. Then they were actually go back in and reverse engineer it and provide the key material back and help them get back out of that situation. We actually have relationships with agencies that can't really talk about fully, but where they've come back and said, "Hey, we've been asked by this company. We're involved in a law enforcement event. Can you help these guys out? Can you talk to them?" We go in, we have the conversation, we ask for a sample of the ransomware. We come back a couple of hours with a proof of life. It's a formalized solution we have. So usually within 4 hours, we can come back with a proof of life. If you give us a sample of the data that's actually been encrypted, we can then go back and like recreate, essentially re-engineer that, right, to be able to produce key material back so we can get decryption happening and have a really good success rate, right? So in the order of 80-90% decryption of that material. So those are really, really interesting cases where we've been able to help people in an event. Now the other side of the coin is we talked about prevention, right? I mentioned like in Q4 of last year, we saw over 4,000 events come through on agents that we had deployed where we actually stopped the potential ransomware from actually deploying, right? So it's really hard to like prove the negative, right? So I can't tell you like, hey, here are all the things like that did happen, but I can tell you here are all the things that didn't happen that we saw, right? And so having that preventative story, being able to highlight the fact that we've actually, again, been engaged when an event does happen and our agent wasn't there, and been able, because of the interesting IP and the people we have on staff, be able to get that data back at a very high success rate, as well as show that we actually prevent data from being encrypted by ransomware. It's a real winning story.
That is a winning story. I'm sold. I wanted to come back to a couple of personal career development questions.
Yeah.
4-time CISO, Ben Carr, how have you grown as a CISO? What is something you maybe did in your first cybersecurity gig as CISO that you're not doing anymore, you've delegated? And conversely, what's something that you're proud of that you've kept from day one?
Wow, that's a lot. So a lot of stuff there. We'll try to unpack. So look, over my career and my tenure, I think when I first took over the CISO role, I think I had a certain set of expectations around it, right? And I think that's expectations that a lot of people have. And I think getting into it, you think about it as a more technical role than it really is. Don't get me wrong, there's still a lot of tech and technology inside the CISO role. But in the role and sitting in that seat, like just like any other C-level person, right? If it's really truly a C-level role, the role you have is to take in a lot of information about that specific vertical that you're managing with the people that you're managing in that role, and then figure out how to make the best choices to move forward to get the best outcome, right? It's not necessarily about doing the work. And so, especially if you're taking over, so, when I took over for Aristocrat, I like to tell people there was no people, no process, no technology, right? A very nascent security program. Came in as kind of the, to build the program for them. And so there's a time period when you're actually rolling up your sleeves and you're doing the work, right? You're deploying MFA, right, for the entire organization, and there's nobody there, right? And so when you're doing that kind of work and then you start to hire in, okay, directors and then direct reports for those people, and you're building a team up and now you've got 40 people, it's easy to get caught up in it's easy, I'll just do it, right? I can do it faster, but quicker, better, because I know how to do it, and you do it. But you're not teaching anybody, right? You're not building a team. You're not building bench. You're not trying to figure out how to promote and grow and, I guess in a way, mentor your staff. So that for me was, look, I mean, I guess I had that perception that that's what I had to do, but actually doing it and putting it in practice, that takes practice, right? Like sitting in your first CISO, right? You're not going to get everything right. Sitting in your fourth CISO seat, you're not going to get everything right, right? There's always going to be learnings. And so I think that was the biggest thing. But I've had people who have followed me, right? Like since Aristocrat, I've had people that have followed me, 3 or 4 careers, right? And I think that speak to the success of the teams you're building, right? If people actually want to follow you. I've had other people that have worked for me, people, who worked for me at Visa, who have gone on to become CISOs in their own rights at pretty large organizations, right? And so I think, if you put the right teams together, that's what it's about. It's about team building. It's about building the right team, handling the job. I think that's really good. So I think I try to focus on that more now. But you also have to know like when you have to dig back in, right? Like you can't just operate at that 50,000 foot level and just say, well, it's all being handled. You got to know when to dive in and ask the right questions and be inquisitive. There's a lot of growth, right? I mean, I also think that communication and listening. Like when I think about CISOs, like we talk about this. I do a podcast on Mondays with Cyber Risk Alliance, right? Business Security Weekly. We talk a lot about communication and how important that is. And I think again, coming from a tech background, a lot of people walk in and they think, all right, well, I've got to apply technology here. It's about building relationships, right? So if I could say one thing, like it's daunting to come in as the CISO in your first role, and now you're interacting with other C-level execs, right? And so the CFO wields a lot of power in an organization, right? The CEO, the chief legal, right? Like they all wield a lot of power. And so when you're coming from kind of that subordinate role and working up, one of the things is, look, you're now you should be hopefully, if you're in the right organization and they're bringing the CISO in with the right reasons, you should be hopefully kind of on that even par playing field. But there's a lot of, I guess, potential self-doubt that I think a lot of people have. And, even now I have that sometimes, right? You have self-doubt about like, am I as good as I think I am, right? Can I do this role the right way, right? Do I have enough gravitas? Am I bringing the right information to the business to make the right choices, right? Should I be in the room? And so part of that, I think, you've got to realize every other leader is having those same internal conflicts and questions as well, right? If you think the CEO is not having those self-concerning questions when they're talking to the board, you're wrong, right? Like every board meeting, every C-level person is having those thoughts. And so I think understanding, coming with a little bit of humbleness to it, but also realizing you have the right to go in and talk to the CFO, and you should. Like if you're not establishing a relationship with the CFO, like starting on your first day, you're missing out, right? Like you should be establishing relationships across the organization and communication. Like that's a lot of it. Like how do you do active listening? How do you like actually hear what someone's saying, right? And then take that in and churn it out. A lot of CISOs I know A-type personalities. I move really fast, right? But slowing it down a little bit, right? Letting people feel like they're participating in the conversation too. So I think those communication skills, the softer skills, man, that gets so much more important as you step up in the ranks. And I tell that to my directors, right? Like if I'm hiring somebody in, like that's part of it. It's the communication and the old school stuff of like, pick up the darn phone. Like just call somebody, right? Like the email, the text message, like it may lose something in translation. But we're into this like really quick response. Sometimes we need that, but we also need the relationship, the communication of picking up the phone and having a dialogue and a conversation with person. Visual meetings, picking up on personal cues, the physicality of a conversation. I think that's all really important.
Ben, you are
Nothing related to security, really, right? Like,
you are a man of healthy choices and healthy advice. And I want to thank you for being our special guest today. I know we can expect good things from both you and Halcyon. I'm looking forward to hearing from you on 8 November at our annual conference at Q2 Stadium. Any closing comments, my friend?
No, Scott, thanks. It's been great to be on here with you and have a conversation. Look forward to being at the conference on the 8th of November and, Halcyon sponsoring. So really look forward to getting out and meeting with everybody there and having close conversations, right? One-on-one stuff. So yeah, that's always better.
We will see you soon, Ben. Welcome to the Cybersecurity Council. This council strives to showcase unique cybersecurity leadership stories. Its mission is to demystify and simplify cybersecurity across the entire business landscape. Best practices, lessons learned, operational recommendations, it's all here. Brought to you by the Cybersecurity Council, LLC, Brian Green and myself, Scott Brammer, will be your hosts. We have come in from the cyber wilderness, not just to share what we have learned, but to find and elevate some of the most important voices in cyber. Brian is a former Division I college football player who has experience across many cybersecurity software startups. He has a successful exit on his resume too. He's also the founder and president of this very community, the Cybersecurity Council. Myself, Scott Brammer, I'm a former Marine and active CISO, and I have 3 patents in cyber and risk. As hosts, we are here to elevate best practices and strengthen the cyber community, both for the community itself and its allies. The Cybersecurity Council has had auspicious beginnings here in the Austin, Texas community, but we are already going worldwide. Everyone should be a cyber practitioner. The views expressed on this podcast, either by us or by our guests, are our own, and they do not necessarily reflect the view of our organizations. This podcast is intended as a forum for professional knowledge, but it is not legal or regulatory advice. Always consult your legal professionals for legal and regulatory matters. And now,
assemble the council.